Welcome, Monster Kids, one and all, to the playground. I am Danvers, your host, aka John Faust. Welcome to Monster Kid Playground. I have a very special guest with me this week, one of my greatest friends, Danielle Gelehrter. I'm sure I still mispronounced your name.
That's all right, Danvers.
I tried. It's all right.
You've trapped me in this rectangle.
In this rectangle.
I don't know what you did, what sort of incantation you swiped from one of my rivals in the coven, but now here I am.
It's true.
It is good to see you, however.
It's good to see you. That's the problem with witchcraft. You get one thing wrong and you just are trapped forever in the abyss. So
that's the way it goes.
So it's interesting. Both you and I just did a interview for this horror host documentary that's coming out. Shockwave. Which is going to be really cool, but I think one of the things we were asked, and a lot of people assume about us, is that we just know each other through horror hosting, but that's not the case at all. It's a strange world. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about this, how we met?
We met through an entirely different world, or perhaps universe. In fact, it was Masters of the Universe. He-Man and She-Ra and Eternia and all Castle Grayskull and the whole nine yards. I think we met at PowerCon.
We met at PowerCon, yeah. Yes. I think we knew each other through like
online,
the website He-Man.org and so forth. Yeah. But we officially met at PowerCon. So
we met there, and we were both involved in the Masters of the Universe fan community at that time. That was kind of how we met, which is, it was kind of indirectly through. And you were also a monster kid. I remember talking to you about all of that stuff at that time and being into all of those great classic horror films.
And I remember being a baby horror host, and I came up and I'm like, knock, knock, knock on your hotel room, and it said, I don't want to ride your coattails, but what do you think about this? And you gave me not your blessing, but you're like, yes, go, be free.
Unholy blessing.
Yes, go be a horror host, run, fly, be
blood
free.
Of a black goat on Danvers. And said, live deliciously.
Live deliciously. Oh, that's hysterical. But
you wanted to do a bit at PowerCon, and I didn't have my Penny Dreadful costume, and I pulled a
I didn't have my Danvers.
Oh
my God, I remember that
tablecloth, and I looked like my Portuguese grandmother going.
I might have had a few beers in me at that point too.
You certainly, more than a few.
But it was great fun. I loved PowerCon. I think that the fandom has sort of shifted directions over the years, but there's so much going on. It's kind of bizarre because we've got probably more Masters of the Universe product in our laps right now than I think we've ever had. But the fandom just seems to kind of disperse, and I think that's. I personally am slowly trying to get away from Facebook. I think the only thing keeping me on, I think the only thing keeping me on Facebook is Facebook Marketplace. So my mileage may vary, but I've kind of gotten away from some of the toxic stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And bless their hearts, Masters can be just as toxic as any other fandom. And just like,
I think before. I was probably too old to have gotten into Masters of the Universe, honestly, in the first place back in the 80s. Yeah. I was a little bit older than most of the Masters of the Universe fans, but I liked it. It was colorful. It was kind of this crazy fantasy world with fun characters, and I got into it at that time, but I was probably a little too old. But, when the online fan community appeared in the 90s with the Adam Tyner website, the mailing list, Guardians of Grayskull, and all of that, it was sort of this weird, it wasn't, it's hard, it seems silly to call it an underground thing because it's a corporate owned brand,
Sure.
but Mattel had all but abandoned Masters of the Universe at that point.
Well, I think the fandom was definitely an underground thing at that point.
Oh yeah, yes. It was kind of like we remember this from when we were kids, and we still are fans of it. So it was fun at that time. And then when He-Man.org evolved, and then the 2000X cartoon, and they tried to bring it back, and then it died again. And the fans, the whole classics thing was very fan driven, and there was a feeling of more of camaraderie I felt at that time.
Yeah.
It was those were fun times. PowerCon was fun at that time, but then I think when all the new stuff came out, this influx of people came into it, and there was like a sort of a toxic element that started brewing that I found very off-putting. And it didn't feel the same to me, and maybe it was because there was such a huge corporate push, and it became more, the whole thing just became like Mattel said, oh, we want this back in a big way. And the whole thing felt very corporate to me. And then you step back and you look back and you're like, yeah, maybe I was kind of manipulated by a corporation when I was a kid, you you start to kind of
I mean, I believe that 100%. It's,
and you start kind of step away, and you're so I've most certainly, I'm still friends with many people from that community, but I have most definitely moved on from all of my involvement with that. I'm grateful for the fact that I was involved in it. I got to work on the Dark Horse books, and I'm particularly proud of the newspaper strips book for Masters of the Universe.
Oh my God, and you should be. It's a fantastic book. So.
And it was basically lost media practically at that, so it was kind of great to get to do that with Val, and to do things like work on the bios with Eric Marshall for the classics line later on, such as they were. There were a lot of mixed feelings about some of that stuff, but we were handed what we were handed.
Yeah. Well, I have very strong opinions about one of the corporate people that were involved in that time, but I won't go down that rabbit hole today. But
nor shall I.
But I have strong feelings, as a lot of people do. But anyway,
that particular person tried to delegitimize my involvement and Eric's involvement and all of that, which is one of the final nails in the coffin for me, because that was born of some weird jealousy or desire to be the only one who could be officially doing these things, and I have the contract that says otherwise. So, but I won't go down. I don't want to do drama.
Right.
But yeah.
I'll try not to stir the pot too much. So.
Cauldron.
The cauldron.
Yeah.
but I mean, I think it's healthy, for one thing, to be like, this was important to me at this time in my life, and I've made friends from it and cherished that moment. But there are other things out there in my life that I want to experience and I want to explore, and I think all of that is valid and healthy. So speaking of which, before we get into the horror hosting thing, you and I both have been actors and done theater for, I'm assuming, I've done it all of my life. You've probably done it most of your life as well, have you not?
No, I was a very introverted child. I was very quiet and shy, and had no even thought of getting on stage. In high school, I was not involved with the drama club. I found the drama kids kind of annoying. Honestly, I was
I was one of those annoying kids.
No, I'm sorry.
No.
Just because and that's probably was my own insecurity, because they were just so extroverted and I was not. And I was one of those. I dressed in a lot of black when I was a teenager, and I had my friends group, but we were kind of the kooky, weird kids. And it wasn't until I was in college that and I talked to Selena about this too, there was a group that was starting up called Experimental Stage, and it was an open mic night, and they were looking for performers and writers and artists and all of this. And I went to the first one. It was run by this guy, Derek Breen, who was a very charismatic, theatrical, outgoing person, really cool, and kind of fringe in his interest, but just really kind of a charismatic guy. And I went with the intention, I went to the first one to write. I wanted to write comedy sketches because he was starting an improv and sketch group as part of this experimental stage. So I approached him and I said, I want to write for your group. And he said, great, can you write up a couple of character sketches for me for next week? I said, sure. So I bring him the character sketches next week. He loved the character sketches. He's like, I also want you to perform with us in the improv troupe. And I said, no way. I was like, no, 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 no. I just want to write. I don't want to perform. And, but he was encouraged me to. He's like, I think you'd be good at it. I think you'd like it. So, and you imagine, I mean, I was, I guess the word it would be goth. I was like,
Sure.
what a black velvet, black hair, dyed black, pale makeup. Things have changed so much for me. So I went and I did the improv. I jumped in and it was terrifying, but it was exhilarating too. It was such it was like walking on a tightrope without a net. There's no script. The audience is throwing suggestions at you, and it was spontaneous creation. And there was something, I'm sure it was awful in retrospect. If I watched all of that now, I'd be like, oh my God, that's terrible. But at that time, it was very formative for me to do that. I needed to do that. It got me out of my shell.
Yeah.
And I was able, it unlocked a lot of creative juices, I guess, for me. And then while that was going on, Derek was also in a production of My Fair Lady at the college theater groups, was putting on My Fair Lady. And he was in that with this guy, Garrett LaFrance, who I'm friends with to this day. Sadly, Derek has passed away. But Garrett is still with us, thankfully. And Garrett also was in My Fair Lady. Derek was playing Colonel Pickering, I remember, and he asked me. They both were like, "Come and be in My Fair Lady. Come and try out. They're still looking for parts." I said, "No. Improv is that's no problem. I don't want to do any theater. I don't want to do any. No. I was nervous, And they were like, "Come on." And there were a bunch of them that were in it, so I went. I got cast as one of Henry Higgins' servants in My Fair Lady.
I love that.
That was my first role. And I remember people in the cast were saying, you're going to get bitten by the theater bug. Once you do this, there's no going back. And they were right.
And they're right.
I loved it. I loved just that energy that was coming from the audience and just being immersed, even though it was a minor character, just creating a character and being that character, being immersed in that character on stage with an audience, and that, getting reactions from the audience, etc. And then I went just down the rabbit hole after that. To this day, I'm in a show right now, actually. I just have not stopped, So, yeah.
I love that. Theater kind of did that for me too. I was pretty introverted, geeky kid, and so much has changed. When I got into high school, I found the theater kids and the community theater, outside of high school, and that brought me out of my shell as well. So I can absolutely relate to that. So speaking of improv, you went and did not IO, but Second City. Is that correct?
Second City, yeah. Yep. I did training at Second City in sketch and improv. And that was awesome in Chicago. I went to the Chicago Second City, and it was a phenomenal experience to do that and to be immersed in the improv scene and then go see shows multiple times per week, because we would do improv, like 3 hours of improv, then you get a lunch break, and then I also was in the sketch program, so I signed up for that. So then you do sketch for another 3 hours, and run sketches. You write them the night before. You're like your homework. You write a sketch, and whatever type of sketch they assign that night, and then you go home, you write it, or not home, but whatever. I was running a sublet, and then you go back, and then you cast the sketch with classmates and run it, and then they critique it, and then do the improv, and it was just and then going to see shows like multiple times per night, both at Second City and at IO, which sadly closed down. But I saw some.
Oh, did it? I didn't realize that.
The IO in Chicago did. Yeah, I don't know if they're back, but they closed down. I believe they're still closed. But one of the most amazing things I saw at IO, Improv Olympic, for those who don't know, was It was improvised Shakespeare. It was all these Shakespearean actors in Chicago who love improv, and they would go and they were a troupe, and they would do improvised Shakespeare. So they would get suggestions from the audience, and they would do an entire Shakespeare play, pulling all these tropes from Shakespeare plays and doing it in iambic pentameter.
Oh my
It
God.
was freaking, it was mind blowing to see that done. So I did that, and I graduated from Improv Asylum in Boston. I did the whole program over at Improv Asylum. I've done classes at Improv Boston. I've always wanted to do the Groundlings too, which I know you did.
I did do the Groundlings.
Yeah, and that's one someday I just want to. I know they have online, and I keep looking for online, but it's like it always conflicts with my schedule. And someday I just wish I could just take a year off and go to LA and do Groundlings. But then I think I'm old, because the last time I did, I don't have the stamina and the cultural awareness. Because the last time I did improv, it was an Improv Boston. It was a class I did at Improv Boston, which sadly has also since closed down. And they were like an institution. They were around for decades. I went up and did a class at Improv Boston, and everybody was like in their 20s, And here I am in my 50s doing improv with a lot of 20-year-olds, and they were great. They had a lot of energy, but a lot of the references and just I just felt kind of like a little bit of a fish out of water, but. So there's that element that kind of sometimes makes me go, do I really want to do this? But I always get sucked back in. Like, for some reason, improv is like a touchstone for me.
Yeah, I agree. Getting old sucks, though, doesn't it?
But
yeah,
I mean, with the backaches, it's like, oh.
When I was 20, I'm like, I will never be that guy that's just doesn't get the references, and But now I'm like, oh my God, what in the hell is going on? Back in my day.
And you're supposed to just roll with it in the improv scene, you just go with it. But it's like I remember one. I don't know if you know that game, 5 Things. Like,
oh yeah.
5 things, and it's like name 5, whatever. And I said, name 5 songs on your 80s mixtape. And they couldn't do it. The person couldn't do
my
it.
God.
She did 2, and then I was like, "Come on!" And then we're like, before our time. I'm like, "Well, I know songs from the 50s, and that's before my time too."
Oh my God. That's hysterical. I love kind of serving it back to them when they do it to me. So, and you got to do some sketch writing and so forth, and how has that influenced like what you're doing now? Are you still sketch writing, or does that?
I haven't been writing any comedy sketches lately, although I'm always tempted to go back to doing it, especially when they just had the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live.
Yes.
And I watched a bunch of those, and it made me I started jonesing to get back into doing sketch and stuff. There just aren't, where I live, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of people that are like passionate about I could get a group of actors to do sketch, no problem. But it's like, I want people that are just like chomping at the bit to do it kind of thing, and there aren't a lot here. But
you and I should collaborate then. So I said you and I should collaborate.
Yes, well, yeah. Well, I'll come down to Texas. And
that's right.
We'll get Joseph.
Actually,
he's done a lot of improv too. Monk's Night Out. He did Second City too, didn't he, Joseph?
Oh, I don't know.
I want to say he did. I know he was in Monk's Night Out. That was the big improv group there, as I recall. But yeah, it's there are people. I know people who are still into sketch up here, but it's like, but then I think about it, it's like I'm not making any move to do it either because I have so much else going. And that's the other thing. It's like, when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, I had a lot more time for some reason. Like, I had time to we did a sketch comedy show, a TV show for cable access called Isn't This Ridiculous? It was ridiculous. Some of the sketches were good. A lot of them were bad. But we did a sketch comedy show at that time. Our improv troupe from college, we started as the Rational Anarchists. That was our initial name. And then we changed our name to Chuck's Cousin because one of the members of the troupe brought their cousin all the time to the rehearsals, so that was Chuck. We became Chuck's Cousin, and we performed a bunch, and then we started a sketch comedy show that we did. I think we did like 8 episodes of Isn't This Ridiculous?
Yeah.
With that improv troupe doing sketch comedy, including Derek Breen. Derek Garrett and I all moved in together in this abandoned hotel. The hotel was abandoned, but there was a house on the grounds of the hotel. It was like something out of Scooby-Doo. It was like a house on the grounds of a closed down motel called the Havenwood Motel in Fairhaven, Mass. And they were renting the house on the grounds of the hotel. So the 3 of us rented it together. And my friend Meredith also moved in after a few months. So there were 4 of us there. And we were renting this house, and we had the entire grounds of this abandoned motel to ourselves.
Oh
It
my
was
God.
amazing. It was amazing, John. Like there was the office section we used for improv practice. We would practice because there was a whole office for the hotel that we would practice, but all the keys to all the hotel rooms were hanging there. So we went into the rooms to check them out. They were covered in mold and mildew. It was so nasty in there. And all this like 70s furniture and beds, old TVs and stuff. It was kind of cool. I mean, we'd have
That's
crazy
amazing.
parties. We had insane parties back there at that time. Crazy parties. Like with all theater people and like musicians and artists and like, all kinds of people that were like off the beaten path kind of. We had a lot of fun back there, but we did a lot of creative stuff. That's where we were shooting the sketch comedy show. We had ample access to all these areas on the grounds of Havenwood, so we shot tons of
that's so
stuff
cool.
there. It was cool. It was a great time to do stuff like that at that time. But I don't have the time now. I mean, I teach college during the day, and I do the podcast, which is very time consuming, and I have family stuff, and there's very little available time and I do theater still. I'm in a show right now, so it's like all of these things. It's like, well, when am I going to make time for? Can I add another thing without having a nervous breakdown?
Yeah,
kind of a thing.
I think when I was in high school, college, there was a bumper sticker that we always referenced that said, "I can't. I've got rehearsal." So I think that sums it up pretty much.
That does. I said that a week ago. My sisters wanted to get together and order takeout and watch a movie or something. I said, I can't. I have rehearsal. To 100%. Yep.
So what do you teach when you're teaching?
Well, I teach college English.
Oh, okay.
Usually 101 and 102 for incoming freshmen. I also have taught classes. I teach short story classes every semester at the community college. I teach the university. I usually teach 101, 102. Community college, I teach a short story class, which of course I load up with lots of spooky stories from Poe and Lovecraft and stuff, Shirley Jackson. And I've taught a class on several times on the strange tales of Poe and Lovecraft.
I love
because both of them were born in New England. So I kind of pitched it that way as New England-born horror writers, and they approved. That was a first-year writing seminar, and I did that a few times. But I haven't gotten that in a while, unfortunately. I would love to teach that again. I've done a creative writing class. I did a class called Literary Themes Terror. They picked the theme. I said, "Can I do terror?" And they said, "Yeah." So I did. Tons of horror stories in that. So I try to work in spooky stuff whenever possible. But usually it's like 101, 102. A lot of essay grading. It's not very exciting, honestly.
Look, I've been a teacher. I know that drill. So
I like the students. Like, it's kind of cool hearing, that's the only way I can keep up with current pop culture stuff. Like, they'll tell me about whatever the latest social media meme or whatever is, or slang that I hear, and I'm like, what does that mean? And then they're all like, hee 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 hee, because I don't know what it means.
Look, I can guess. You're not that original. That's hysterical. So you have been a horror host for quite some time. How, if for people who don't know, your show is called Shilling Shockers, which is very famous in New England and throughout the U.S., really.
I don't know who got that memo, but it wasn't me
Well,
that it was it's very famous.
how I mean, we're both into monsters and horror stories and horror literature and, movies and everything. So, I mean, for me, it's just an easy jump. But how did you get into horror hosting? How did you create Shilling Shockers?
That's I got into horror hosting through it was a lot of what we talked about already kind of fed into that. Prior to being a horror host, I was always a fan growing up of classic horror. I was a monster kid, am still. My uncle Valdemar introduced me to classic horror.
Your Uncle Valdemar? What an
yeah.
amazing name.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have an Uncle Valdemar and my aunt Agatha, his sister Agatha. I'm like, it's destined to be like live in Collinwood,
I mean, clearly.
So Uncle Valdemar, we call him Uncle Val for short, but he's not that much older than I am. He's like 15 years older than I am. So he was always more like kind of an older brother. Like when I was really little, he was like a teen and in his early 20s. So he gave me all his like famous Monsters of Filmland magazines and stuff. My family moved from Portugal to the U.S. in the 60s. So Uncle Val got into like all of that stuff, Dark Shadows, Hammer films, going to see them in the theater while they were still coming out at that time, and second run movies, Universal horror films, famous monsters, etc. So when I was a little kid, he used to like talk about all that stuff and introduced me to that stuff and gave me all his famous monsters, Dark Shadows, bubblegum cards, all of that stuff. He used to imitate Boris Karloff. He gave me his horror records, Pickwick horror records, all kinds of cool stuff, So I grew up immersed in that stuff through the 70s, and I loved stuff like the Monster Squad TV show that was on TV at that time. And I love the movie too, which is to not connect, because I was talking to Selena about this. It's Monster Squad movie is a completely distinct
Different
from
thing,
the
yeah.
TV show. Yeah, so I grew up with like reruns of the Groovy Ghoulies they would show with the Gilligan's Island cartoon on Saturday mornings. I loved the Munsters and the Addams Family, all of that stuff, and Creature Double Feature out of Boston, which would show all kinds of really cool horror movies. I think that was the first time I saw a Paul Naschy movie. Was Frankenstein's Bloody Terror was on Creature Double Feature, heavily edited.
Yeah.
But it was this crazy werewolf movie on a Saturday morning. It's like, what is this? If they were showing stuff like The Mummy's Hand or King Kong versus Godzilla, I would watch that instead of going outside to play. So I grew up loving that stuff. Uncle Val got a VCR in the early 80s. It must have been like 81, 82, and he started getting copies of tapes of Universal horror films. And eventually in 82, he got Dark Shadows, copies of syndicated Dark Shadows tapes.
Oh, wow.
And then it came on TV too, on Channel 58. So I got totally hooked on Dark Shadows and watching all those great movies. You'd say, you want to, I got the Wolfman, you want to watch it, So we'd go, we lived with my grandparents, so we'd go over there, and I just would spend the afternoon watching like Wolfman and The Bride of Frankenstein and Dracula, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
AIP Corman Poe films with Vincent Price, Hammer movies like Dracula's Risen from the Grave, so much good stuff. It was just a very formative kind of thing where it was like all of this horror stuff, especially gothic horror. I was like, it was mainlined into me, and so I loved it. I was scared. I'd have nightmares all the time, but I still wanted more, and so there weren't a lot of kids at school there were a couple of kids that liked the classic monsters, but not a lot. It was like that age.
Me too.
In the early 80s, that age of the slasher was coming in, and so I felt like a lot of the stuff I loved wasn't being appreciated.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, it was kind of the end of the monster craze, like that early late 70s going into the early 80s. We got the Remco figures came out, and that was kind of almost like the last gasp of the classic monster craze before like Jason and Freddy and all of that kind of came to the forefront, and that didn't grab me as much. I was more into the classic stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Not that I have anything against it. Like I've seen many of those films. It's but it's just like not. Sure. I don't love that stuff. Like whereas I just like the classic monsters are like some weird way they're my friends almost.
Yeah.
I don't.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You know.
And like for me, especially when you talk about Hammer, I love historic time periods, especially the 18th and 19th century, and I love like historic sewing, and I'm done costumes and all of that. So that feeds right into my Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee.
Oh yeah.
Fascination, because I mean those Hammer films just were so stylish and period.
Absolutely.
And I loved it.
My grandfather, Uncle Val's father, he looked like Peter Cushing. He bore a resemblance to, so we used to call him Peter Cushing. Yeah, he didn't know who it was. He was poor. He barely spoke English, but he looked a lot like Peter Cushing, especially when Peter Cushing was older. But anyway, so after I got into theater and comedy, like I had that love of comedy too, like performing, but also like all of the classic, like with Uncle Val, we'd watch the Marx Brothers or W.C. Fields or Laurel and Hardy and all of these great classic comedians. And I loved like Carol Burnett and Lucille Ball and Saturday Night Live, all of that stuff. Like it just was, I loved comedy probably as much as I loved horror too. So
for me, David Letterman was like, especially the early stuff. That was a huge influence on me. So
I can see why. Yeah, and I can see that influence on you. Actually, I can see that in your kind of humor and stuff. Yeah. So the horror host thing, I knew what a horror host was because in Famous Monsters I had seen Zachary in there. I had seen a picture of Zachary, and I knew what a horror host was. I had not watched Zachary yet at that point, but I had an idea of what it was. It was like a funny, spooky, weird host that introduced stuff. I knew who Elvira was, but her show didn't air on the channels I had. I didn't see Elvira other than as like a spokesperson for Halloween, almost like she was on TV a lot in commercials and things, but like I didn't really see her show presenting a horror show. The first horror host I saw actually presenting horror films on television was Commander USA, which was cable, but it was the USA Network in like '86. I was a teenager already at this point because I had grown up with Creature Double Feature, which was unhosted. Prior to that, when I was really young, Simon, who was a fantastic horror host out of Boston, his show, Simon Sanctorum, was on, but I didn't remember it because I was very young at that time. Subsequently, I discovered the footage of his show. I presented it to, and he was amazing, and I'm so honored to have been able to get that footage, and for me and Rebecca to kind of get it restored and put it out so fans can see how amazing Simon was. And prior to him was Feep out of Boston. It was a little space alien voiced by legendary local kids show host Ed McDonald. He was like a TV legend in Boston. He voiced Feep, this little space alien. But again, I don't remember Feep. There's audio that exists of Feep, and I wish I could watch it. I've tried to find footage of that. But Commander USA, I loved Commander USA. He was the first horror host I saw showing old movies and like alligator people and crazy stuff like that. He'd show all kinds of stuff. And I loved Commander USA, Jim Hendricks. And so did Ivan, who subsequently played Dr. Manfred von Bülow on my show on Shilling Shockers. So we became friends freshman year of high school. We talked all the time about Commander USA and all the crazy things that we liked. So later on, Ivan was part of my sketch comedy show of Isn't This Ridiculous? He was writing lots of sketches and performing in it too. So we were both, we've been friends for so long. And so Ivan and I talked about doing a horror host show in around 1998. We're like, we should do a horror host show and present, show movies, old horror movies on TV. But because we were already doing cable access with the sketch comedy show. So we're like, oh, let's do a horror host show. But we didn't know about public domain movies, like what can we show, what can't we show. Like now it's easy to find out with the internet, and look it up. At that time it was like very early days of the internet, so we weren't sure how to find what was public domain and what wasn't. So we kind of talked about it, but it never went anywhere. Then I moved out to California in 2001. I met Magoo. We moved back. We got married. He was Guru on Shilling Shockers. You know Magoo, obviously. You knew him. So when we moved back, around 2003 or 2004, I discovered a show called Scary Monsters in Scary Monsters magazine. I was flipping through Scary Monsters. I found Gula Gogo.
Oh yeah.
I said, what is this? This sounds awesome. And I figured out how to watch it. This was very early days of streaming. Some of the
Yeah.
cable access stations in New York were very choppy, sick, to watch it. But I was able to watch it like out of Long Island. They're amazing. It was like a these horror hosts. It was a vampire, Vlad, the Hunchback, Crichton, and the Invisible Man, hosting a kids dance show where they danced to 60s style garage rock music, current bands that play in that style. The show was in black and white. They showed all these educational and industrial films, but it was like horror hosts mixed with this retro 60s dance show that was based on like an actual real show from the 60s. I love this. Is better than anything on commercial TV or on cable TV. I love this show, and it just kind of inspired that. In their credits, it said horror host, thanks to the horror host underground. I said, what's that? So I looked it up. I found they had a website, and it was all these horror hosts, like they each had a profile all over the country showing public domain horror films on their local cable access TV channels. And some of them were on, very few were on commercial TV, some were on cable access. But it was like all these names, like Professor Griffin was on there, and Dr. Gangrene, and Halloween Jack, and all these people that were showing these movies. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is amazing. Like I was like shaking. Like I was like, just like, I don't know, it was like a lightning bolt or something. And around this time, I was playing Medea in the Greek tragedy. Medea, I was playing the title role in that. And of course, for those who may not know, Medea was a very powerful sorceress from Greek tragedy who helped Jason acquire the Golden Fleece. So she's married to Jason. She marries Jason, and this is set years later when they're middle-aged. They have 2 sons. And Jason, for political reasons, wants to leave Medea, and he wants to go marry. He wants to go be with the young princess, so he can, get connected with King Creon and all of that. So he's not even in love with the princess. He just wants to kind of.
He wants the power.
Yes, and. They've been in love with each other for years. Their love was legendary, and he betrays Medea. So she's, it's kind of you don't cross Medea kind of a thing. There's a very, she becomes very vengeful. She's described in the script as a tigress. So she's, and she calls upon Hecate to unleash this terrible vengeance on the princess, and she wants to punish Jason, and ultimately she's like, you mess with this witch, so what are you doing? So she gets all the ultimate revenge by murdering their own children. She murders her sons. It's a feel good play.
It's the feel good,
yeah. So I was playing Medea, and she's a witch, and I was joking with every night the kids and I, with the 2 sons who were so cute, we would joke around. I would do some very morbid puns with the little kids, and with the cast even, just because it's very heavy material. So you want to keep things lighthearted during backstage or whatever, during rehearsals, because, it's like you're murdering your kids every night. And they would say that too. You're going to kill us again tonight, Mom? Yes, indeed I am.
Yes.
They'd be putting fake blood on themselves and stuff. It struck me. That was lightning. That felt like the lightning moment, because it hit me at that point. Because it was like, oh, I'm a witch in this show, and Massachusetts and New England are known for the witch thing, and we have never had a witch horror hostess in New England. And I said, how is that possible? It just seemed like a no-brainer, and since I am a no-brainer, there it was. I said, well, I will be that witch horror hostess, and that's how that came. And I was already using the name Penny Dreadful. I had been using that for years. I was in a punk band called Shitty Kitty, and we were shitty. We lived up to our name as Penny Dreadful. I hosted a radio show as Penny Dreadful. That was a name that I had already been known by, so it worked very well for a horror host as well. And I asked Magoo. Magoo was sort of he was like a cross between, I told Selena this too, he was like a cross between a vaudeville comedian and a punk rocker. Like he just had that kind of combination. And I asked him if he would be my werewolf sidekick in the show. And I said, you won't talk. You'll growl and howl and be kind of this goofy werewolf. I said, "You want to do it?" He was like, "Yeah, baby, sure." You know, he
I
was
love
always
it.
like all in for everything. Like anytime I'd ask him to do something, he'd be like, "Yeah, baby, cool, I'll do it." You know, so
As opposed to mine, who's like,
Dr. Coke, come
Dr.
on.
Coat.
So
Hell hath no fury. Dr. Coat is going to make another appearance if I have anything to say about
I
it
think
before.
you need to make that happen.
So, yes.
I think Dr. Coe, I'm making a special request.
That's right.
So Guru was born, you know, and he took that and he just turned that into something so special.
He did. It was. I loved watching that so much. So
He was so good, and he was like very much that, like, he loved Harpo. Like Harpo was like his hero.
Yep.
And he just you know, he infused a lot of that and the Scooby-Doo elements into it, and kids loved Guru. Everybody loved Guru, and he just, you know, he had a lot of fun doing that. And then Ivan, who was Von Bulow, Dr. Manfred von Bulow, the semi-retired monster hunter who lives next door. He was sort of like Penny's frenemy, sort of the Newman to her Seinfeld, you know. So, so Ivan, who I've known since freshman year of high school, I first met Ivan because we were at the lunch table, and he took his bread from his sandwich and used it as a puppet, and then made the puppet eat all the other food on his plate, and did a funny voice for it. And I was like, "Yep, we're friends."
Oh, that's great.
we became fast friends. We're doing both of us doing stupid accents and imitations, and pretending we were British half the time. I don't know what. We watched way too much Monty Python.
Yeah.
So Ivan was I remember one time, I was telling Selena this too. At one time in the '90s, my friend Mike, who's been on Mike Patnod, he's been on Shilling Shockers a bunch. I think it's between him and my sister Amy who have done the most guest characters on the show. But Mike had said, "Oh, it was just a small group of us weirdos," and he was like, "Oh, we're gonna have a vampire party. It's going to be vampire night." So everybody showed up. This group of us, it was like 7 of us maybe, showed up at Mike's house dressed as vampires. Ivan showed up dressed as Van Helsing. He showed up dressed as Van Helsing. I thought it was the most hysterical thing ever. I was like, "That's amazing." So when I started up the show, I reached out to Ivan. I was like, "Hey, you want to be this like Van Helsing character who like kind of bickers with Penny and stuff?" He's like, yeah. So he came up with this very Harvey Korman-esque kind of character with a funny German accent and all this. And then we shot a couple of episodes. I think we were actually halfway through episode 2 when Rebecca, my friend Rebecca, who was in the improv group with me in college, we knew each other from college doing improv and theater and stuff. I've done a bunch of Rebecca was also a dear friend. And she's brilliant. And I was the only show I've ever directed. It was a Grand Guignol horror show from the French Grand Guignol. It was called The Final Kiss, which is a very gruesome show, as most Grand Guignol shows are. And it was the local art gallery, Gallery X. They said, "Oh, can you me from Penny Dreadful, from the radio show and all the." They knew I was a spooky person, and they said, "Oh, can you direct a show, something for Halloween for us?" I said, "Are you sure you want me to do that?" They're like, yeah, we need it. So I directed The Final Kiss, and Rebecca was her and our friend John Softcheck, who's also appeared in Shilling Shockers quite a bit, were the leads in that. And Rebecca, the whole premise of that is, I go down that rabbit hole too, is it's sort of like they did it and they adapted it into one of the Tales from the Crypt comics. It's this guy whose wife, he's going to leave his wife, and she throws acid in his face. Yeah, so he's in the hospital recovering from this acid burn. He's disfigured. He has bandages over his face, and so she feels guilty for what she's done, so she wants to come and see him. So he accepts her requests to come and see him, and she comes to visit him at the hospital, and the whole thing ends up being a trap, where he ends up, to get revenge, he pours acid on her face, which he has ready. And the way we did that was we took petroleum jelly. I read like how did they do this, because Grand Guignol was like full frontal gore. Like it was awful stuff that they pulled up, but it was amazing what they could do. So we got petroleum jelly and strawberry jam and mixed it all together, and we had it in this little tub under the couch under this like divan thing. And so when John poured the acid on Rebecca's face, which I can't remember, was some kind of juice or Sprite or something, I can't even remember what it was. He poured it on her face, and then she'd grab the stuff from under the divan. She's so,
yeah.
it looked like the flesh was melting off her face. It was disgusting. She was amazing, and her scream is like, Rebecca has quite a voluminous scream, so it was like shook the rafters. But anyway, that was a side trip. We did this play, and I said, "Oh, Ivan and I have to go because we're going to go shoot this new horror show we're doing." She's like, "What? Why didn't you tell me about this? Can I help?" And I was like, "Yeah, come on." So she came and she started running the camera.
Yes, come into my trap.
Yeah. She started running the camera, and then she eventually became the director of the show because Rebecca is a brilliant actress, but she's an amazing editor and director, because we were both editing early on, but she's way better at it than I am, and she knew the shots she wanted to do, and she's like, "Oh, you might just want me to edit it?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." So she would edit the shows and direct them, and we became, producing partners on the show, because we were, it was kind of a process where we'd come together to do this, the four of us. And then when Rebecca started dating Eric Parks, he kind of became our Lyle Wagner. He was like our fifth kind of member, but he'd help out a lot too, play parts, help Rebecca with setting up the lights and everything like that. So it was a very collaborative thing. We shot season 1. We started shooting in 2005. And we released our first season in 2006, January 2006. But we shot it all through 2005. And we started on public access, and we got it on in New Bedford, and we got it on in Boston and Fall River, Salem, Providence, Rhode Island, and gradually it spread to over like a plague.
Plague.
Yes, 200 cities and towns in New England we got on, and eventually to other places as well.
That's great.
And it kind of developed a kind of a funky. It's a little it was like a cult following kind of a thing,
Yeah.
We had people that dug it. We started getting invited to cons to do appearances or live events, and we had a lot of fun doing it. We did it for 10 years, and when Magoo got sick, we finished our last season. We actually completed it after he passed away. We had a couple more episodes to shoot, and that was our last season in 2016. And then after that, we released Halloween specials for several years. I think we did seven specials. We haven't done a special. We didn't do a special last year or this. Yeah, we didn't do it last year, and I don't think we did one the year before either. But we did do specials for about 7 years for Halloween. Yeah, and maybe we'll do it again. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I feel you, because it's like sometimes like the inspiration's just not there right now, so we're gonna back off of this, and maybe we'll reconvene, maybe we don't. So
it's not the same without Magoo.
Yeah.
He was like, we were like a comedy team, and
Yeah.
so I've done many solo episodes as Penny, even when Magoo was still with us, and I still enjoy doing it, but there's something there's a poignant sort of quality to it when we're doing it. It's like his spirit is there, it's like,
Yeah.
but it's also like I miss him a lot since he's not there, and we're like physically there with me. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah.
I still will probably do more things as Penny. Every year I usually do live stuff, like live. I did live hosting event this past Halloween. For the Poe and Lowell event in Lowell, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Matt Smith asked me to host the Raven, the Roger Corman.
I love that. That's awesome.
That was super fun. Yeah.
Did Magoo have like a favorite episode that he did, like that's like, oh, this is one of my favorite bits or something?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I should have mentioned Rebecca also played Luna.
Yes. I guess I know this, but viewers
we went to
like
Danvers. Actually, we went to the Danvers Asylum. It's right before they tore it down, and we had a whole. There's a whole story associated with that. Anyway, Magoo.
You got chased off. Anyway, go ahead.
We did, yeah. We had to run through the woods so we wouldn't get arrested. And with Rebecca in a straitjacket and me in a witch getup. But Magoo was, I don't know what his favorite episode was. He would watch it every week when it would air. They'd air it here Friday nights. and he'd put it on, and I'm like, Magoo, why are you watching the show? Like we already, what's like, why are you watching it? He's like, it's because of the ratings. I was,
Oh,
there's no ratings. There's not gonna be any ratings with cable access TV. Um, but he'd put it on. I can't remember what his favorite one was. I think it was the movie I know he liked a lot was Carry On Screaming, which is a horror comedy,
yeah.
part of the British Carry On series. But he liked the movie because he used to quote it all the time. But our hosting segments in that episode were terrible. I did not like our hosting segments. That was a terrible idea that I had to do. Instead of a laugh track, like so Von Bulow wants a laugh track or something like that for the show, and then Penny casts a spell and turns it into a scream track instead of a laugh track, which sounds funny, but it was really annoying because every time it was like, "Ah!" Every time he said so, it was like, it got old really quick. It just got real old. So yeah,
It might be one of those things where it's like it's funny and then it's not funny and then it circles back.
yeah,
And you do it so often, it's funny again. So
yeah. But I know Magoo liked that movie a lot, but I don't remember the segments for what his favorite like our parts were for.
yeah.
So we did one for Guru's birthday. We did one where Guru hosts the Penny has to go out or whatever, and so Guru hosts the episode. He takes over the episode, and there's subtitles because you can't. He uses like werewolf subtitle powder or something, so we can see what Guru is saying, and it's
hysterical.
Yeah, so we had a lot of fun with that.
I love that. It's so much fun to visit those memories and and I'm the same way. It's like you have these collaborative things with your friends, and it's very special. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I pulled in like everybody I knew who lived around here, including my parents, my sisters, all the friends I knew from around here to play different things. Like, oh, we need space aliens for this episode, or we need zombies for this episode, or hey, can you play Brooke Shields? We're showing, Alice, Sweet Alice, and Brooke
yeah.
Shields is in that. So can we? So I asked my sister. I remember I asked my sister to play Brooke Shields, or Penny's going to be in high school in this episode. Can you play like a mean girl, but she's a demon? My other sister Maggie ended up playing like this mean girl demon in the high school. It's all kinds of silly. It's fun thinking back on all the, and it's great that all of these friends and family members were so willing to do these ridiculous things,
I ask people to be in my show and they're like, what do you want me to do? I don't trust you, because they know it's going to be like a John Waters moment.
Yeah.
So
I think at first Rebecca played a lot of different characters, but then when she started really directing the show more, she had to be behind the camera more, and then she started dating Eric. Eric played a lot of different characters. Eric Parks, played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
He played all kinds of different characters. Guru's ancestor in one, and then our friend Melissa was a zombie. She was our go-to zombie. She's the best zombie I've ever had on the show. She was great. And like I said, my friend Mike Patnod, he was always kind of our go-to. Oh, we're doing Dr. Moreau. We are going to be he likes Dr. Moreau a lot, so we had him as Dr. Moreau one time, and we had him as the guy from what's the Carnival of Souls.
Oh yeah.
So we had Mike play the Carnival of Souls guy who's following us around through the whole episode, and we had a lot of fun. It was fun tying the stories to the movies,
Yeah. Interesting side note about Carnival of Souls. I can't remember the actor's or the character's name for that matter.
Candice Hilligoss, the actress.
No, the guy that is in like the boarding house with her.
Oh, I see. Oh.
He was like the director of the theater department here at the University of Houston. He's passed now. But one of my good friends, Faith Taylor, who's actually in the Night of the Living Dead thing I'm about to launch, she was there in the theater department when he was over it. So she's got all these stories about him and so forth. So I'm going to try and wrangle her in to talk about that at some point. So
yeah, for sure.
But anyway, so like what is your most influential horror movie? Since we're both horror fans, like what is your like go-to?
Wow. I would say
No pressure.
I can't pick one. I would say it's probably the three, the Trinity. It's the three Universal horror classics of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman.
And the Wolfman, yeah.
If I had to pick one, I probably would say the Wolfman is my favorite classic Universal horror film. I love the Wolfman. It's just it's such a tragic sort of. Well, it's actually Chaney becomes more tragic in the sequels. I guess he's kind of a wolf prior to becoming a werewolf. In the
He's
film.
kind of a creeper in the Wolfman. So
I didn't pick up on that when I was a little kid.
I didn't either.
But then when I watched it later, I was like, "Oh, that's creepy." He's like watching her through the telescope and stuff. So but I still love him as the Wolfman. I love the Wolfman movie. Just the atmosphere of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the atmosphere and just everything about it. And...
I would say that's a one.
Do I buy that Claude Rains is Lon Chaney's dad?
No,
but hey.
Overlook that. I did it. Just that never jumped out at me either. I was never thought wow, Claude Rains is Lon Chaney's dad. It just never.
Yeah.
I know people mention it now, but it doesn't never really occurred to me.
Yeah.
But that I liked the Frankenstein too. Frankenstein was really important to me, because just the pathos of Boris Karloff in that role, I connected to a lot too. So that one was quite formative, I guess, too. But just movies that were fun, like Dracula's Risen from the Grave, and I love Black Sunday too. So it's I can't really pick one. That's a tough question to answer because there's so many that I really care about.
Yeah, I agree. So Frankenstein and Dracula are hugely influential on me, and I didn't understand why until a little later. But of course, Karl Freund was the director of photography on those films, and he came from German Expressionism.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, Metropolis, Nosferatu, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, those are some of my favorite films, and they're all German Expressionism. Yeah. And I won't go into what that is. You guys can Google it if you don't know what it is.
All of those films.
But it just the sets and the creepy factor. It's just it's oh.
Those,
so
we wouldn't have. we wouldn't have the Universal horror films without the German Expressionist horror films, and I love those movies. So much too, and we showed all of them too. All the ones you mentioned. But because they were, pretty soon, only a few more years. Well, the Universal classics will be in the Dracula and Frankenstein.
They'll be in the public domain. Yep, I talked about that in my last episode, I think, actually.
Then every horror host,
and I'm sure we're all gonna be like, we're the first one to do it. So,
and I love Dracula too. I watched it with the. Later with the Philip Glass score, but I actually I which is great, but I prefer the silence of the original film because there's something very eerie about that. And Lugosi was so good, so
amazing,
he felt like he was a vampire, watching. He was great. But I can't pick one. It's so hard. I love
it. Is
Bride
hard.
Of Frankenstein.
That's
too,
why I like to torture people and ask them though. So
Bride of Frankenstein too. I really liked a lot.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, it's James Whale is incredibly influential, and just and now kind of being a gay man and understanding sort of that influence on horror in general, and just especially what he was trying to do with Bride of Frankenstein, it means so much more than it did at face value now. So so speaking of vampires and spooky, what am I trying to say? Atmosphere. That's the word I'm looking for. Let's dive into Dark Shadows now. So we're both huge fans of Dark Shadows. You have taken it to another level. You are the host of Terror at Collinwood, which is just one of my favorite podcasts ever.
Oh, thank you.
How? I mean, I can understand how you got into it, but why did you decide to pull the trigger? It's I'm going to do this podcast.
Well, okay, so I love Dark Shadows since birth, because my uncle Valdemar introduced me to right when I was really little. I mean, he was giving me the bubblegum cards, which I was scared to look at, even because of Barnabas fangs and everything. I was like, I would like flip the card over. One of the famous Monsters issues he gave me was 59 with the Basil Gogos Barnabas cover. And then when I finally, and he would talk about it all the time, and when I finally got to watch it, when he got those multi-generation tapes that were recorded off syndicated broadcasts, I got immediately hooked on it. When that hand grabbed Willie Loomis by the throat, when Barnabas' hand,
God, yeah.
it grabbed me by the throat too. I was totally hooked, and I kept, he'd get tapes from his friend Mark. He would give him tapes with like 6 hours of Dark Shadows on the tape, and I would go over and watch them all. Whenever you'd get a new tape, you're like, oh, I got more Dark Shadows. I'd go over, and I would just stay over my grandmother's house. I would nonstop watch Dark Shadows. And then when the tape would run out, when he'd get the next one, I was hooked and watched. The tapes ended partway into the 1795 storyline, which was the origin of Barnabas. And this is, today a lot of people who don't even know what Dark Shadows is, it had such a huge impact on the depiction of vampires in pop culture, but even just the horror, fantasy, sci-fi genre, and how it's presented and how those characters are presented. You get a full-blown origin story for the vampire in the show, and then the tapes ended. And I was like, oh no. Talk about a cliffhanger. I was like, well, is Vicky going to get back to the present? What's going on? Barnabas Angelique had already, spoilers, Angelique had already turned Barnabas into a vampire. And so we, not that long after, thankfully, Channel 58 out of Vineyard Haven out in Cape Cod here started airing Dark Shadows as a UHF channel. So Uncle Val had got a roof antenna, because, he had gotten rid of the roof antenna. Growing up, I'm sure you probably, I don't know if you did too, maybe you're too young. But
we absolutely had all of
dial that. So I had that when I was a kid, and Val got rid of his, but then he got a new one so we could watch Dark Shadows. He got the roof antenna installed again, and we could catch Channel 58. And I'd go over. It was like after school. I was running home from school. I more like sauntered to my grandmother's because it aired at like 4:00, which is when it aired here back in the day too. Yeah. Every day, Monday through Friday, Channel 58 was playing Dark Shadows. I'd get out, take the bus after school, not go home, get off in the bus stop near my grandparents' house, walk down, and 4:00 would come. It was probably be like 3 when I'd get there. It's like counting down the minutes, and then Dark Shadows would come on, and I would record it so Uncle Val could watch it when he got home from work. But I'd watch it twice a day. I'd record it and then I'd watch it, and then I'd watch it again. So and they played it. They were in the Adam storyline, Adam and Eve. It was Adam storyline so Vicky was already back in the present. And Barnabas what's going on? Is this Frankenstein? I knew about Adam because Uncle Val had told me they do a Frankenstein story. Yeah. So I was like, oh, this is the Frankenstein story. So I watched that, and they played it all the way through, partway into 1970 parallel time. Because in the show, they go, I don't know if you watched the whole.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've watched the whole thing.
Okay. So, they did parallel time, and then the syndication package ended. And for those who are listening and don't know, they do a parallel. Dark Shadows is nuts. So, they do all kinds of crazy stories, and they did a parallel universe story. They did 2 parallel universe stories, actually. There's this mystical portal in the east wing of Collinwood that leads into a parallel universe. We don't know why that portal exists, but there is a portal that goes to a parallel universe.
Doesn't your house have a parallel, I know, shouldn't they? Portal that, I just thought that came standard.
I'm pretty sure Yuka has a parallel universe in his son.
I'm sure he does, yes.
Yuka, if you're listening, do you tell us about your parallel universe portal? So anyway, it goes to Anti-Eternia.
Oh my God.
So it ended in partway through parallel time, because that's where the syndication package that World Vision was putting out ended. The last year of the show wasn't available, or it was like really expensive to syndicate that. So fortunately, very shortly after that, MPI announced that they were going to be releasing the entire series on VHS. So I bought all of them. I bought every month. I was working part-time at my uncle's clothes store, on weekends, and all the money I made, any little amount of money I made, all went to the MPI home video tapes. I bought the whole series on VHS, and I finally got to watch that last year. And then after, at the end, they released the first year of the show, pre-Barnabas. I watched all of those. And I got into the fandom. That was the first fandom I got into. Selena asked me that question too, like, how did you get into fandoms? And I talked about online fandom in the 90s with news groups and stuff. But even before that, the Dark Shadows fandom I got into through it was the Dark Shadows Festival sent me all these flyers, and I subscribed to the World of Dark Shadows and Inside the Old House and Shadowgram and Shadows of the Night and Windcliff, all these Windcliff Watch in the 80s, mid 80s, 86, it going all into the 90s. I was subscribing to these zines and newsletters, and it was so exciting to get that envelope in the mail and your new fanzine came in. And this was pre-internet, that was connecting with fans in that way. I didn't go to a Dark Shadows festival until like 2006, though. I was like, I don't know, I just didn't, I should have, but I wish I had been more involved in going to the conventions at that time and stuff, but I went twice to the festivals. So during the pandemic, I rewatched Dark Shadows because couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah, what else are you gonna do?
What a perfect show to watch if you're stuck in the house for a year, because there's a lot of Dark Shadows. There are 1,225 episodes, as you know, so there's a lot of Dark Shadows, and I love Dark Shadows. I'm like, I'm going to go visit my friends at Collinwood, so again, it probably was my third rewatch, I think, of the series, and it had been quite a few years at that point since I had watched the entire thing. And what a ride. I just had I loved it. Dark Shadows is the perfect escape. Yeah. And it speaks so much to those of us who always felt like outsiders as kids and felt other and felt different, and Dark Shadows always has resonated with me on that level as well. So I don't know, it's just like an escape. They don't talk about politics and wars and all of this on the show. It's in its own weird other world. Like a lot of Gothic tales, it's just like an isolated, weird place, that all this stuff is happening. So I rewatched it, and in 2021, I started looking for Dark Shadows podcasts, and I think it was like at the end of the rewatch. And I didn't find much. There was Resident of Collinwood I found on YouTube, and I didn't find out about the Between the Shadows, who launched their great podcast. Cara and Kristen, they launched their awesome podcast maybe a few weeks before I did, and I wasn't aware of it. I didn't see it at that time. It wasn't coming up in my search. So I said, and I knew the Collinsport Historical Society had done a podcast, but it was over. They had not done any new episodes. So I said, well, I want to do a podcast. I want a Dark Shadows podcast to celebrate the show. At that time, the 55th anniversary was coming up of the show, and there was nothing planned. There was nothing announced. There was nothing going on, and I knew COVID obviously was still going on. So I said, well, I'm going to do it, and I had no idea how to make a podcast. I'd never done a podcast before, but I learned by watching YouTube tutorials on how.
That's how I did it.
How do you make a podcast? What do you do? And what do you need to do it? And I read about the RSS feeds, and I read about the Yeti Blue. Or I don't want to promote products on your show, but about the microphone and the headphones and.
These are tools that everybody talks about. So
that we use, and I knew the Adobe editing suite because I had used it for Shilling Shockers. In the early days of Shilling Shockers, I was using that, so I downloaded the Adobe.
Sorry, my dogs are being misbehaving, so that's why. Stop that!
I know Crispy's in the other room, so I don't know what she's doing in there. But so I learned how to record over Zoom. I had a Zoom account through work, and I was doing online classes. Because I couldn't go in, so we were doing it through Zoom. And I said, well, if I can use this and record the podcast, and I was at first I was doing audio only, but then a lot of people started asking for video. So not that far into it, I started adding in the video element. I already had a YouTube channel with the audio version, but I put it, I got a Squarespace-based website. I don't know it's the easiest one to use because it's very kind of intuitive.
Drag and drop type of thing, yeah.
Totally, because I'm not good with that stuff. I made a website. I got Eric Marshall, the wonderful Eric Marshall, who co-wrote the Masters of the Universe bios with me and is a dear friend. And Eric is a brilliant artist, as you know. He did tons of Masters of the Universe artwork too,
Yep.
but he liked Dark Shadows too. He watched Dark Shadows during the pandemic, so he watched Dark Shadows. He got sucked into it, and he did the logo for the podcast for Terror at Collinwood, and it's a great logo. And Eric, and then he used to do for our friend James E. Talk's Serial Geek magazine. Eric used to do this column that was like, what if this movie had a
Right.
cartoon in the 80s, and we do like, the Goonies or something like that as a 80s cartoon. And I asked him, I said, Eric, what if Dark Shadows had a cartoon in the 70s, like a Hanna-Barbera, like they did with Star Trek, with Filmation did Star Trek? What if Dan Curtis did the same thing with Dark Shadows? So he did all these great designs, and we kind of did, that was our 60th anniversary, 55th anniversary Dark Shadows celebration thing that we realized, what if Dark Shadows had a cartoon, and did this fun thing just to get the fandom excited about something and fun and new, something that they hadn't seen before. And that's the whole thing for me. Is I went into it with the idea of celebrating Dark Shadows and in a fun, positive, enthusiastic way.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot honestly from doing Roast Google Dinner too, from doing that for all those years, and kind of how Val kind of hosted the show, and just talking, and how our banter was and stuff, and then doing the horror host thing for all those years too, and interviewing people, doing the radio show, doing theater. All of that kind of stuff plays into, you build kind of certain skills or whatever you do, and kind of use that
Yeah.
for other things. So but for me, I want it to be a love letter to Dark Shadows. 'Cause
Yeah.
it means so much to me that I want to have that as sort of giving something to the community, the fan
Right.
community or whatever, and getting to interview some of the cast members, and talking about the storylines and the characters. And it's fun. To me, it's like, my mantra is Dark Shadows is fun. I don't
Yeah.
do it for drama or whatever. Like, I like doing investigatory kind of episodes too, where we talk about, well, why did this happen, or why did the show end, like I did with Mary O'Leary, and
Right.
these kinds of things.
And I
But
just rewatched that episode. I'm like, oh yeah. So
isn't that wild?
It's
like
crazy, yeah.
nobody knew that all of that stuff happened with
And-
Dan Curtis and Jonathan Frid.
yeah, and one of the things that I brought up before, that kind of leads right into this, is it's like, as fans, especially as older fans of older properties, we're kind of keeping that stuff alive. And I think that's one of the ways to celebrate it, is to, like, hopefully, expand its base a little bit. I mean, I know people use the word, bringing it into the next generation, but I mean, it's true. It's like, if we don't keep talking about it and introduce it to new people, then it just kind of fades away.
Exactly. Yeah. And talking about it, celebrating it, introducing it to new people. That's why I love my friend Raymond Castile. I don't know if you know Ray, but he does a Raymond Castile's Basement of Horror, and he talks about classic monster toys. Some are not classic, some are current, but usually it's classic vintage monster toys and collectibles, and he talks about them and gives the history of them and what it means to him, and talks about, and it's like really cool. It's like, it informs people about these things that may get lost to memory, but he's documenting them in a fun way. And I think that's important for, and like something like Monster Kid Radio too. where they talk about all of these stuff, and what you're doing with this. It's all of this kind of celebrating this stuff that we don't want to get forgotten, or
Right.
And
the other cool thing, it's like with Dark Shadows and like why it ended, or these monster toys and their history, it's like you find out new stuff that you never knew before, and it like infuses this new energy into it, and like creates this new enthusiasm, and that's kind of rare to happen at this point, because it's like, as fans, we almost know everything there is to know, and then, oh, I didn't know that, and it's really fun. So yeah. And speaking of which, so you've had some pretty amazing guests on Terror at Collinwood, like the David Hennessy episode, who played he played David in the series. How did that come about? Like, how do you get these guests to come on and talk to you? A friend is asking.
Your guess is as good as mine. No, that was thanks to Catherine Lee Scott. Catherine Lee Scott is who played Maggie Evans and Josette in Dark Shadows, and in House of Dark Shadows she played Maggie Evans too. She's amazing. She is the Dark Shadows dynamo, and I've had her on the podcast a few times, 3 times I think. Catherine, it was actually John Logan, the screenwriter, Tony Award-winning playwright, won the Tony Award for Red. He wrote the screenplays for like Gladiator, The Aviator, Hugo. He created the Penny Dreadful Showtime series.
Yes.
Yes. So, and he's a huge Dark Shadows fan. Which, if anybody watched Penny Dreadful on Showtime, I remember watching it for the first time. I'm like, this person's a Dark Shadows fan.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, you can absolutely tell.
So John, I've had the good fortune also to have on the podcast, and he's a friend. He's a great guy. But John Logan had lunch with Catherine, and he said, "Oh, I was going to talk to Catherine about, is there anybody you kind of want on the podcast that you'd like to ask?" And he mentioned David Hennessy and Nancy. I mentioned David Hennessy, and we both were talking about Nancy Barrett. And Nancy, unfortunately, couldn't do it right now, but hopefully someday she will. I'd love to have Nancy Barrett on the podcast, who played Carolyn on Dark Shadows. But David, Catherine connected me with David, and he was willing to do it. He gave me an hour, and it was so. I still have to pinch myself. Like, I talked to David Hennessy. For those who don't know, he does not do this kind of thing. Like, David Hennessy lives in Panama. He is a very successful restaurateur and exporter of organic foods. He's really into sustainable agriculture, which is incredible, and I wanted to talk to him about that because I think it's important. And so but Catherine, she gave me a good recommendation to David, and David was willing to do it, and it was great getting to talk to him. So the first half of the show is about what he's been doing in Panama and stuff with his restaurant business, and then the second half was all about show business and Dark Shadows and his career in show business as a kid, and it was really cool to get.
It was fascinating. One thing that struck me though, I mean, he's lived in Panama for like 20 plus years, but I'm like, David, you have a slight Spanish accent now, and I was not like prepared for that. I'm like, whoa, okay.
He absorbed some of that, and given that he's an actor, it's like, it just seems like it's easier, I think, for people who are performers to kind of they take in some of those traits, and he did. He has a little bit of a Spanish accent, which is so funny, it's like, wow, because he doesn't sound like he was a kid at that time, but it's like, his accent is very different from what it was, but he still has that kind of impish kind of sense of humor.
Yes, but it was hysterical, like going from contrast of like this wine connoisseur to this is how we got in trouble on the set. So,
Yes, it was really cool to get to talk to him, and it's thanks to John Logan and Catherine Lee Scott also for making that happen. He had done an interview with Catherine too for her, like she posted it on her Facebook page. But in terms of like podcasts and things like that, David doesn't really do this kind of thing, so it was really cool that he did that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really fun getting to talk to him, and Patrick McRae is working with him on a biography, so hopefully that'll be exciting for fans when that comes out. But I've gotten to talk to him, Catherine, David Selby, who played Quentin, of course. I've talked to James Storm, who played Gerard, and Mary Wallace, who played Eve, and Jenny Collins. Roxanne Drew, Donna Wandry, who played Roxanne Drew, Sharon Smith-Lentz, who played Sarah Collins, the ghost of Barnabas's little sister. I've got to talk to some really cool. I've talked to Angelique, of course, Lara Parker, the late great Lara Parker. What an honor that was. I reached out to her directly for that one. Somebody hooked me up with her contact information. Who had interviewed her for a magazine, and I didn't even ask for it. I would not presume to ask for something like that because it's like, people get weird about that. But he offered it to me. And
Yeah.
I said, yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
I reached out to her and she did the interview. Some of the other ones have been like Ansel Faraj, who's a filmmaker. Ansel's
Yeah.
a brilliant filmmaker. He's worked with many of the Dark Shadows cast members. He lives out in Los Angeles. And Ansel's he makes some great movies. Like he just released The Great Nick D, which is a comedy, and a romantic comedy. It has a heart to it, And
Yeah.
he's done sci-fi kind of the Last Case of August T. Harrison. He and also the Dr. Mabuse series with Jerry Lacey, who played
Yeah.
Reverend Trask, and it was Ansel. Ansel was directly responsible for helping me to get Jerry Lacey on the podcast because Jerry also does not really do podcasts. He's been on the MPI interviews and he's done the festivals, but Jerry doesn't do a whole lot of these types of things. So what an honor it was to get to talk to Jerry Lacey. And at one point it was like surreal. I'm like, oh my God, I'm talking to Reverend Trask.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's just so cool to get to talk to him.
I have to say, so my two kind of Dark Shadow stories, the Reverend Trask thing, where they do the Cask of Amontillado bit.
Oh yes, yeah.
That story, for one thing, just scared the bejesus out of me when I was a kid.
scary.
Just that idea of being walled up. But when they did it on Dark Shadows, I had nightmares about that for weeks.
Yeah.
And but the things that scare me fascinate me. So he always will have a special place in my heart. Not just being a incredible villain, but just being able to visualize that thing that scares me.
It is scary. That is terrifying, and it is nightmare inducing. The way Barnabas does that and walls him up, and he's holding the candle.
And then in later episodes, they unwall it, and his skeleton is there.
Yes,
so.
skeleton, and then his ghost shows up and puts Barnabas in there and puts him on trial with all the ghosts of the Barnabas's murder victims.
It's just so good.
Great.
In 2006, I was in Memphis teaching high school for a very short period of time. But Laura Parker, I guess, had launched her, I want to say something about Dark Shadows or a biography or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. But my biggest regret is I was in rehearsal for something at that point. And I wanted to go to this book signing of hers and couldn't do it because I was in rehearsal.
Probably Angelique's Descent.
Yeah. But I wanted so badly to go and meet her, and I never got to. So.
I met her once at one of the Dark Shadows festivals I went to. I met her. I bought the Salem Branch from her, which was her second novel, and she signed it for me to Penny Dreadful. She was super cool. When I had her on the podcast, she was very intelligent, brilliant, actress and writer, and she was also a college professor at one point. And it was really cool getting to talk to her and just dive into some of that stuff about Gothic horror, terror versus horror, and all of these things, and her character, and her career. But then afterwards, when it was over, she chatted with me for a while too. She was like, "So what's the Penny Dreadful thing all about?" She asked me a lot of questions. She was curious about my life, which was cool of her to do that. But all of the Dark Shadows cast members that I have met and talked to, and have had on the podcast or have met in person, have all been really nice. I've not had any, and I've only ever heard nice things, honestly,
That's really great because, you're sometimes kind of scared to meet your heroes.
Yes. I met Jonathan Frid too.
Did you?
I did indeed. Yes. It was, he was doing one of his one-man shows up here, and it was at Brown University, and it was in 1990, I believe. It was right before the new Dark Shadows came out.
Yeah.
It might have been October 1990, somewhere around then. And I remember I got these illustrated Shakespeare plays, and my mom helped me to put a nice ribbon on them and stuff, and I brought that as a gift for Jonathan Frid. And he did, after lovely. The show was over, which was brilliant. He was so amazing. His voice was just so... He'd read tales of Edgar Allan Poe, and he did I think he did a Stephen King story. He did all kinds of really cool stuff. It was Fools and Fiends. We had several of his one-man shows, and then after it was over, he did a meet and greet thing in the lobby, and that's where I met him, and he was so cool, just so
Yeah.
charming and very gracious. It was very gracious, and I
Yeah.
gave him the books, and he was like, "You brought this for me," He was just so nice, and he signed. I brought a couple of. I brought a picture. It was a picture of him walking outside the old house that they did a photo shoot at the old house, and it's him in 1795 clothes, walking in the snow with the cane. And I handed him the picture. He's like, "Oh, you brought this marvelous picture," and he signed it, and he was really cool. And so I'm glad I got to meet him once. And I saw him at a festival too when he came back to the festivals, but I didn't go talk to him at that festival. I saw him there, on stage, but yeah. So
That's great. That's
cool
really
to get to meet him.
That's wonderful. It's wonderful to have like these. I think our generation, those 60s, 70s, 80s kids like got this deluge of just culturally significant stuff, and I feel sorry for people that don't have that now. So
I think they have different things now, but it's things that I have a tough time connecting with myself, and I'm sure the previous generations probably had a tough time connecting with what we were into, because my students write essays about, I want them to write about what they're passionate about, and but I'm reading essays about these video games like Roblox and things like this that I'm like, what is this? And they love these games and things that they talk about that I'm not familiar with, or that I don't really. So I Google it. I'm reading, and I'm like, this sounds kind of interesting. What is it? Like, and I'm not fully sure what some of those things are when I look them up. I'm like, I see pictures or whatever, or I read a little bit about it. I read about it in their essays.
Well, I will say this, like, I'm not a gamer by any stretch of the imagination, but like I've played some games, and it's just like, it's so immersive, and you get so into it so quickly.
Right,
so I can get it, because it's almost like you are experiencing it. I think your brain.
Yeah.
So.
But the thing is, though, a lot of them don't know any of the stuff from the past. They can go down YouTube, but I feel like it was easier to find stuff growing. Like when I was a kid, I'm sure it was with you too. I think we were the last generation to experience the pop culture of the previous generation as part of our pop culture. All of those reruns on syndicated TV when you'd get home from school were all like shows from like the 50s, the 60s,
absolutely,
the early 70s, like all of this stuff. Like watching the Partridge Family or Flipper or the Monkees or Leave It to Beaver, Dennis the Menace, whatever it was, well, I think Dennis the Menace was later on Nick at Night, but they were showing that. But, stuff like that was not where kids today, I don't think, would really know what that stuff is.
Right.
And in fact,
my God, I was so into the Monkees. I remember just afternoons, just like waiting. And
yes. Oh, totally. I love the Monkees. Banana Splits, all of this stuff that was, it was just on. Like, and when I was a kid, I didn't really think about whether it was like an older show or not. It was just, this is coming on.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to watch it. Or Lost in Space is on. Or Batman's Batman, Adam West Batman. I grew up watching that. All of these are great shows. Gilligan's Island, F Troop, all of this stuff. But anyway, I was wearing a necklace in class, and it was Bela Lugosi as Dracula. It was just like his face, as on the necklace. And one of my students was like, "Who's that on your necklace?" And I said, "Oh, Bela Lugosi." It was like crickets. It was like silence. I was like, "Bela Lugosi? No, you guys don't know who Bela Lugosi is? You don't know Bela Lugosi? Nobody." Like Dracula,
Wow.
Dracula, and then a couple of people are like, "Oh." Like,
wow.
So that was a bit heartbreaking, and I bet it would be even worse if I said Boris Karloff. I had a Boris Karloff necklace, which is tragic that the legendary Boris Karloff, that people wouldn't know who that is, and much less horror hosts too. Like
oh God, that's
they know who
they know probably who Elvira is. If we're lucky, they know who Svengoolie is.
Yeah, maybe now. Yeah, Svengoolie and maybe Joe Bob Briggs. There might be certain kids who know that. And Elvira, I think they would know more as just a pop culture character.
But if you talk about Zach, I was going to say
the legendaries or Vampira. Or Vampira. I mean, Ghoulardi, all of these like legendary horror hosts who like basically, set the foundation,
Set the standard,
for,
yeah.
for TV horror hosts. I mean, they don't know. They don't know what that is. I remember I've said over the years, even I'm sure you've had this experience too, or you say,
Oh, I mean, half of my conversation are like, oh, I'm a horror host. Half of the conversations you have to explain what that is.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. Yep. What is that?
So.
Yep. I've had that happen many times too.
And then they're like, oh, okay, that sounds
As they slowly
interesting.
back away.
You're like, okay, whatever. We talked a little bit about like toys and so forth. We're both toy collectors. Did you have any favorite monster toys growing up or now? Or
growing up, my mom and dad would not really get me monster toys, and I wanted them. I remember the kids who lived on the third floor of the tenement place where we lived had the Mego Mad Monsters, and I wanted them, but that never happened. I thought they were cool. I remember begging for the 8-inch or 9-inch, the 9-inch Remco monsters, particularly Dracula. I really wanted that Dracula. And my mom wouldn't get it for. She said, "It's a ton fait," which means that, oh, that's so ugly. Yeah, she wouldn't get. My mom likes spooky stuff too, like ghosts and things, like ghost stories and things like that, and she likes those kind of things, but she not to buy toys of.
Right.
So I had a couple things. I had this, which this is not my original childhood one, but I used to think it was King Kong, but Ray Castile informed me that it was the Congo gorilla. But I have this. This came out around the time the Dino De Laurentiis King Kong came out, around in the mid-'70s. So I loved this thing when I was a kid. I played a lot with this little monkey, the little gorilla. Awesome. And I thought it was King Kong. I had, this is not really a monster toy, but Mascotron from the $6 Million Man.
Oh, yeah.
Has the faces, he's a robot. But I didn't like monster toys. I did. Now I do. I have a lot of them. Actually,
we've talked about it and
kind of do this kind of thing, and you can see some of that stuff up there. I don't know if you can see any of that, but I got a lot of collectibles now.
Let's see if I can do the same thing. I'm a little tethered
I
here.
got the Aurora models over there.
So I've got my bookcase full of various.
There they are.
Yeah. So.
Very nice.
The NECA stuff that's come out, the Nosferatu, the Count Orlok on the carriage, that's like one of my favorites.
Yeah, those NECA ones are. I have quite a few of those too, and I got all the Mego monsters down there that came out in recent years. Yeah. I have the Universal ones, and I'm really and I have the Nosferatu, the Count Orlok. And
I wonder if we're gonna get a new Count Orlok, the one
from the new movie.
From
I
the
don't
new
know.
movie.
I don't know if they. I'd like them to do a couple of more characters that I'd like them to do as well. Like I'd like them to do a Hunchback.
Oh yeah.
And I'd like them to do a Frederick March, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I know is not Universal, but
it's still. I still think it goes along with the classic monsters.
It totally does, because it was like it came out at that time, and it just fits right in with that. So I'd like them to do that for NECA.
I've been campaigning for them to do Dwight Fry.
Would you rather have Renfield or?
I would rather have Renfield, but if they can get the likeness license, I think they could do Renfield and they could do Fritz. And,
I would love that, and I'd love them to do Colin Clive, Dr. Frankenstein, which nobody has done, and I don't know if that's a licensing thing or a likeness rights thing, but they've never done a Colin Clive. I'd love him as Dr. Frankenstein.
And I would love to have a Van Helsing.
Yes, yeah.
So
they're doing the Hammer Van Helsing. Peter
yes, I've got that pre-ordered.
And Christopher Lee. I ordered the Christopher Lee Dracula. I've got the Christopher
Lee Dracula right up here.
See, did you get it from? Where did you pre-order that one from?
I think I got it from Big Bad Toy Store.
See, I pre-ordered it at Big Bad Toy Store when it first went up, and I still haven't received it. It's been on pre-order for months, and so has Vincent Price. I pre-ordered Vincent Price.
So I still haven't gotten Vincent Price either.
Okay.
So yeah.
So I'm like, what is going on? And I messaged their customer service. I was like, I think I pre-ordered Vincent Price in May. So it's been like 9 months since and then I pre-ordered Christopher Lee Dracula quite a few months ago too, and I still haven't gotten him. And they were like, "Oh, we still haven't received them. You know, when we get them, we'll send them to your pile of loot.
There's a few of them that I'm still waiting, like Masters of the Universe, the Origin stuff too. I'm like,
oh really? Yeah.
okay, but you know,
Yeah.
hey, it's fine.
They must be pretty far along with the vintage line and Origins. How many do they have left for the vintage?
So there's not many. I just got Rio Blast.
Cool.
And Modulok is in my pile of loot. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look to see how many they have left. I know that it's not many, but it's like they haven't done any of the. I'm wondering if they're going to do the Giants or if they're going to do Hero and Eldor.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if they're going to do any of that, but
If they don't do
we'll
the
see.
Giants, they have to do the Giants. They should, if they want to have a complete line. They
Yeah.
gotta do the Giants. Yeah.
But I mean, they've teased all that stuff, so I'm hoping they come.
Yeah,
come
I
do
don't.
it, so.
I don't do Origins. I will admit, I bought two things. I bought Orko when he came out,
Yeah.
and I bought the Prince Adam and Prince Adam and Cringer rather. Prince
Yeah.
Adam Cringer 2-pack.
I
Because
have
that
that
Cringer,
too.
I love. Those are like my three favorites.
Yeah.
was Prince Adam, Cringer, and Orko. I love the funny characters, and I just love that they like just going relaxing, you know, after saving the day as he
After
can.
saving
Prince
the
Adam
day,
goes
yeah.
and takes a nap with Cringer in the woods, and
Yeah.
Orko's or fishing or whatever. I don't know. It's just like
I love it.
flying
Yeah.
a kite or whatever. Or,
I at this point, because I sold all of my, or 98% of my vintage stuff, so I only have just a couple of things left. But I'm like, I'm so far into Origins now, I'm going to at least complete the original line. And, you know, most of it's in a box, but it's just like,
yeah.
so.
Do they, go ahead. Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
They're doing the cartoon collection now? Are you
The
getting
cartoon.
those too?
Yeah, I'm not all in because I'm just running out of space and money. But like, you know, Cringer and Battle Cat, of course, I'll do that kind of stuff, and some of the She-Ra characters I'm getting. If I have a connection to it, I'll get it. But like some of the more obscure Origins things that are coming out, I'm like, like I know the Masterverse Panther came out. I'm like, I'm not gonna do that.
I don't get any of that stuff. None of Masterverse Origins. Something just shut off in me in terms of my interest in any of that. It's other than those, like I said, I got the Cringer, but.
And this happened in classics too. You get so far down the line, it's just like after a while, it's just overload. I'm like, okay, we need to wrap it up now because you're gonna lose me. So, it's like you can just tell it's time to kind of put a bow on it and say goodbye. So.
Well, they're moving a movie now, I guess, for the Amazon Prime or. So I saw
that
some
looks.
pictures.
I mean, I was going to say I've seen some pictures, and I can't remember the guy's name, but I saw him in the Showtime thing. It's Mary, and it's where he becomes the lover of King James, and the whole scandal. And anyway, it was a really good series. And that actor is in it. He plays Prince Adam. So, I mean, I've seen what he can do. And I know he can act, and I think he's going to be, you know, great. I don't know what the script is going to be. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm not like most people, like, oh, it's got to be this. I know that like stories have to be told, and, you know, it's not going to be X, Y, and Z. Every screenwriter is going to take their liberties with it, and they're going to, you know, the goal is to tell a good story. If they can tell a good story and it's engaging, then I'm all in. So, you know.
Well, I don't know. I'm sure the fan base will have a meltdown regardless of whether.
I mean, I'm sure they will.
This is what makes me kind of wonder of Dark Shadows. Like I always talk on the podcast, you know, everybody wants a new Dark Shadows. The sequel series to Dark Shadows, which they have not done, and that would be kind of awesome. And I'm interested in seeing that, but I also worry. It's like, well, do we want Dark Shadows to go mainstream again? Because it, you know, in the '60s and early '70s, it was, you know, for kids and teenagers were fanatics for Dark Shadows. Do we want Dark Shadows to go mainstream again? And I always ask that because, like, the impulse is to say, yeah, we want Dark Shadows back, but then it's like, what if things go like we saw it happen with Johnny Depp and Tim Burton, who were Dark Shadows fans, but we got like a comedic Dark Shadows, and
Right.
that's not what nobody really wanted that, So, I shouldn't say nobody. Maybe might be some people that wanted a comedic Dark
Yeah.
Shadows. I certainly did not. I think most fans wanted a gothic, spooky Dark Shadows,
Yeah.
but whatever. And I'm not Tim Burton and Johnny Depp. I know were Dark Shadows fans. I'm not denying that they were, but it's like that tone is not right. And it's like if that had been hugely successful, which it was not, but if it had been like a huge hit, that would have then become the default thing that the mainstream audience would think of when they think of Dark Shadows. Oh, it's this funny vampire family thing. And it's like, that's not what Dark Shadows is. And that's what I worry about, is like a new version of it that kind of supersedes what Dark Shadows is supposed to be, or what it was. Well, I want it to be true to its roots. And if it fails, then at least it fails on its own terms, and it's genuinely an attempt to capture that vibe, that feeling,
Yeah.
Because I know the 91 series, as short-lived as it was, some people didn't like it, but I think it at least was true to what it was trying to capture.
Yeah.
Dan Curtis was like, okay, we're doing this gothic story,
Yeah. I liked the 91 series.
I did too.
I was disappointed when it just ended, because I remember watching it when it first aired, and it was, I liked it a lot, and I still like it.
And a lot of people like the Burton Depp film too. I've gotten some. I am kind of I am critical of it when I talk about it, but I'm not mean about it. There were things I liked about it, especially visually. Every Tim Burton movie was visually beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
And it looked like Collinwood, and I appreciated that Johnny Depp like really tried to do Jonathan Frid's mannerisms, and with the hair, even with the bangs. It's just I didn't like that comedic tone.
Element
It's
to
just
it.
like
Yeah.
this doesn't work. This is not. I don't know why that was pushed, and that's my criticism, and that's what I mean. It's like if something is not. And we see with Masters of the Universe, the fans had a meltdown over Revelation, and some people liked it, some people didn't. But it was like, this is unnecessary to go to this level of outrage. And it did kind of happen with the Burton Depp film when that came out in the Dark Shadows fandom too, honestly. And I was kind of upset about it, but I wasn't like, being a jerk about it. You can express your criticism without being nasty about it.
Yeah.
But I do worry that it's like if there's a new Dark Shadows, if it's not the people that I know that have been trying to get a new Dark Shadows going, they are fans and they are genuinely trying to do it as a gothic horror, gothic romance kind of a thing, and they're fans, they're monster kids, they're fans of classic horror stuff, they're fans of the show, and that. But so were Burton and Depp too. But I don't know. I just.
I mean, it's interesting because how much of that was their decision and how much of it was like the studio going, it needs to be. We need to make this more profit, so it's going to be better if you do it comic instead of this other thing.
And
so
I have heard from reputable sources that was exactly
that's the case.
That the studio pushed for comedy.
Yeah.
And that Burton eventually he got on board with the idea, because the original script by John August, before Seth Grahame-Smith came in and did a new script, which we got a hold of, and we did a 2-part episode on that. John August's script was not a comedy. It had some humorous moments in it, but it was not a comedy. It had a lot of problems too. I thought he put everything but the kitchen sink into that script, and there was too much in the script, but at least it was not a comedy. Whereas, but on the other hand, he also did things that didn't feel Dark Shadows, like the Leviathans riding on snowmobiles at the end and attacking Collinwood. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Leviathans should not be riding snowmobiles. I'm sorry.
Hey, let's throw everything at the wall and see what happens.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So I don't know. Anyway.
So kind of moving on to our final thing, unless you have one thing I will ask. So where can people find the Terror at Collinwood podcast?
They can find Terror at Collinwood on all major podcast apps like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, etc. Radio FM, etc. Or on YouTube, there is a YouTube channel for Terror at Collinwood as well, and of course the website terror@collinwood.com. And all the episodes are archived there. But please do subscribe to it if you listen. If you like listening to podcasts, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Subscribe. Please rate it if you like it. If you don't like it, you don't have to rate it. And on the YouTube channel, which we do video versions for that, often with video clips or whatever, or pictures or things like that to illustrate what we're talking about. So please do subscribe and like the videos if you enjoy Dark Shadows, or if you're a monster kid and like hearing about a spooky show that had a lot of impact on pop culture, definitely give it a look.
Awesome.
And John has been on a couple episodes of pre-recorded clips that you submitted.
Yes.
The horror host tribute to Dark Shadows.
I talk about my grandmother coming in and like, you don't need to be watching that. It's scary. And my grandmother was very Southern Baptist, so she was like...
And you can also find the Penny Dreadful stuff I do, the Shilling Shockers, at shillingshockers.com. We do have a website, and we have whenever there's like kind of an event or whatever, we'll post about it on the website.
And you can order DVDs of the past shows, correct?
Yes. If you like ancient formats that will eventually be phased out of existence, get your DVDs while they still exist.
That's right.
So we have DVDs of every season of the show that Rebecca puts together, and there are Easter eggs on the DVDs, and a lot of get the movie and the hosting segments, etc. And then we have a Vimeo channel too, where you can watch the Halloween specials we did, and the Monster channel does play our moldy oldie episodes. So usually Saturdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, the Monster channel runs those, and it's also on a WWON in New York. They play it, and several other stations out there are still playing it, but I don't know. I haven't kept up with any of that, but I do know that quite a few stations are still playing it. But sure bet is probably the Monster channel, streaming channel on Roku. You can watch it there.
Yeah. Nice. Cool.
Yeah, along with other horror hosts. Like Danvers.
Like Demented Feet. Well, when they play me, they don't play me very often. Or they play me at like 3 p.m. When, not that I'm bitching. Sorry, Halloween Jack, but yeah, it's true.
People watch it though. I mean, Saturdays at 2. That's when they play Shilling Shockers. It's like not prime times. I don't care. It's like,
yeah,
I appreciate that they play it, and I hear from people periodically that watch it, on the Monster channel. So that's kind of cool. But,
so you live in New England most of the time.
Yes.
So what is your, kind of to wrap this up, what is your favorite part of New England?
I love New England. There are things I don't love about New England, like the freaking cold in the winter. It's today isn't too bad, but last week it was brutal with the wind chill. It was really cold. Yeah. The snow and the cold and all, I'm getting too old for that, but I really was like too much. But I do love New England. I always call the Transylvania of the United States, because, and
I was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah, I say that in the sort of the Transylvania in the pop cultural sense that we think of. It's like all things spooky, because New England, we have so many weird, spooky, monster or related or horror related things that are connected folklore wise to all of this stuff. The main thing, of course, we are known for the Salem witch trials, which is a tragic historical event where people were killed.
Yep.
It was terrible, but there's an element to it where it's like, oh, witches, cool, and they lean into that in Salem, as you know.
As I know, yeah.
They really play into that, but it's like, it's cool, it's witches, it's Salem, but we have the vampire scares as well in the 19th century, most notably Mercy Brown, where people thought there were vampires coming back and they were digging up graves and dispatching these vampires. That really happened, folks. That's New England for you. A suspicious group of people that that vampires are coming, ghosts everywhere. So many.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's the first. It's an old part of the country, not compared to like Europe, but is
but that's the old. I mean, New England is basically And the East Coast is the
East
oldest
Coast.
part of the United States, or
There's-
America.
Yeah, so we have a lot of colonial ghost stories or Victorian ghost stories and all of this kind of thing. Lots of stuff like that, and werewolves even up in the Acadian region of Maine and Vermont, with stories that were brought down from the French Canadians about the Acadian loup-garou, and I've started writing a book about that. I've started pulling together stories from people in Maine
Oh,
who
that's
had werewolf
awesome.
stories. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
haven't. I need to get back to that because I started that a few years ago, and I have all these really cool stories that I was able to get from the folklore department at the University of Maine in Orono. So it was werewolf stories, and we got Champ, the Loch Ness monster of New England here, and just all kinds of just weird stuff like that, things to do with the devil, and like Dudley Town, all kinds of weird, strange stories. So we had even
The
a
Witch
friend.
of Wellfleet.
Yes, yep,
Yep.
yep. We also had the Hammond Castle up in Gloucester, which the was this mad scientist who had pieces of actual castles and monasteries brought over from Europe, and he built his own castle overlooking the water, and he did strange experiments in this castle. He was a scientist. He had, I forgot how many hundreds of patents, but he did some experiments that perhaps there were rumors that he was trying to bring his cats back from the dead. And it was so we even had a Dr. Frankenstein type of character here. If you ever go to Gloucester, Massachusetts, it's about a half hour north of Salem. Definitely check out Hammond Castle in Gloucester.
Oh, I
'cause
will.
It's really cool. And of course, the Gloucester Sea Monster was another thing that happened over there. Lots of weird stuff. Well, first alien abduction was up in New Hampshire with Betty and Barney Hill. Like what? I don't know. There's just something weird, very weird about New England, I guess is what I'm saying. So I dig that. And in the fall, is you get the leaves changing, and you can smell the people burning leaves in their more rural areas. You can smell that look and that feel. Oh, my sense of smell sucks now. I have like 5% left of my sense of smell, but I love that. Just that feeling of fall when the leaves are changing and it gets a little crisp in the air and it's windy. A little wind, a little breeze, and the dead leaves are blowing around and the sky is a little overcast. Or you get foggy mornings where it's like the mist is just that look of New England. And there's all these horror writers that came out of New England, like obviously Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft. Edgar Allan Poe was born here. He's more associated with Baltimore or Virginia, or Richmond. But he was born in Boston, and he came back to Boston too to return to Boston. He had a very adversarial relationship with Boston. But Poe, Stephen King, of course. So we had some horror writers who are, I think, influenced by the environment. So. There's a lot of cool stuff about New England. There's a lot of crummy stuff too. I'm like,
as there is everywhere, but
don't wear a Yankees t-shirt if you're in Boston. That's a Yankees cap.
Oh my goodness.
I don't care. I have no interest in sports ball. I have no interest in sports, but I do know that that would probably be an unwise thing.
That would be an unwise thing to do. Don't find something at the thrift store. Oh, I'm just going to wear this ironically. No. Well, Danielle, thank you so much for being part of this episode. I love hearing your stories and all of the things you're doing. And I encourage everybody to go check out Shilling Shockers and Tara at Collinwood. Of course, you can check me out anytime at dementedfeatures.com. And we will be doing more episodes of the Monster Kid Playground here very shortly. So you'll have more to explore and more guests to listen to. But other than that, I will bid you farewell. And until next time, I'm John Faust, a.k.a. Danvers, for the Monster
John.
Kid.
Thank you, Danvers,
Yes.
for having me on. I appreciate it. It's been really fun talking to you. And you took your name from another famous New England
I did from
the
the
Danvers State Insane Asylum.
That is correct.
Which indirectly influenced Arkham Asylum in the Batman comics.
Yes. So we try to draw our influences from cool stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
thank
so
you.
much. It's been great talking to you. Thanks for having me on.